All right. So our next item is our presentation from Burbank Housing. Would you like to give us an introduction, Carrie?
Sure. So Rich Wallace is here from Burbank Housing. There you are. Hi, Rich.
Hi, everybody.
And just as an overview, Burbank Housing has been working in the community for many, many years. And there are actually a couple of communities that they operate in Sebastopol, including the North Gravenstein apartments, which is actually recently refurbished with creating actually a couple of additional accessible units, speaking of accessibility, recently. And I believe that work is completed now. If you've been past it, the buildings are all a different color. The landscape has been, and the buildings have all been given the TLC that they needed. So with that, I will introduce Rich. He's going to be talking on a number of affordable housing topics, but including working with ecumenical partnerships. So thank you, Rich.
Great, thank you, Carrie, and good evening, commissioners. Thanks for having me and giving me the opportunity to put together a variety of things to talk about. It sounds like I think I've got about a half an hour to talk, another 15 for questions. I may not take up all 30 minutes, and I certainly don't want to take too much of your time. And also to be informative and not repetitive of other presentations. So I want to thank Carrie as well for kind of pointing me in some good directions as far as the housing element and the inventory from 2014. Been able to look at sites that you've identified in the community and some of the things that maybe we can talk about tonight. I also want to congratulate folks for an inventory that was what is it, 7 years old now, and about half of the items on this list are under development. That's a good sign. You pick some good sites. So I've got a couple of different PowerPoints. I'm going to kind of switch back and forth between them. Not a lot, just once. And hopefully I'll be able to do this where it'll be a full screen. See, there we go. So now that works on mine. I don't know if it doesn't work on the screen. Does it?
We can
shows
the main slide.
You can
on your next slide, Rich.
Yeah, right. How do I do that so I don't have the next slide showing? It doesn't really matter. Is that down here?
You need to start the slideshow.
Oh, I did start slideshow.
Oh, is that it?
Let's see one of these toggles down here. See all slides, pen laser, zoom into the slide, more slideshow options.
It might be up top under display settings. I'm not sure. I've not used this.
Oh, you're right. That might be. Does that work?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Great. So I'll just jump to the first slide. So you stole a little of my thunder with Gravenstein. I just wanted to mention initially, Burbank Housing and Sebastopol go a long way back. And there are, yes, 2 rental projects that Burbank has done in Sebastopol. We've also done at least 4 additional home ownership projects that are affordable home ownership projects. Oh, somebody has just entered the waiting room. I got that. So Gravenstein is 60 family rentals. It was built in '88 and renovated for the first time using the low income tax credits model in implementation of an old tax credit project, but this is the first time around. And probably next week, if not the following week, we'll be closing on our perm financing. It's been a long time coming. The project's been complete since, God, I want to say late summer, early fall, but it takes a while sometimes between the time that you finish the work and you bring all the people back into the units that have had to be temporarily located and arrange for the financing, and then verify all of the tenant files. And that's one of the things that's taken us until May to finally close. So we're excited to have that done. Bodega Hills is a bit older of a property, 1997, and smaller as well. But it's also combined in a cluster with Bodega Avenue townhomes, both the ones that were built in 1993 and additional 23 that were built in 1988. Hollyhock is another affordable homeownership project, and that's the most recent homeownership project done in Sebastopol for Burbank. In Sequoia Village, which are 20 affordable home ownership projects, home ownership units built in 2019. I'm sorry, 2009. Now I get to switch over to the other one. So I'm going to stop sharing this for a moment and bring up this and see if I can get this right. And go to the display settings, right? No, your screen has the full one. Mine has the next slide. So this is a case study in Napa that opened in late 2019. So we'll use that as kind of a case study. We're asked to provide some case studies, but also an overview of tax credits, which everyone can always use a refresher on. There's no end to the minutia and details, which we're not going to get into, but we are going to get a good overview. Hopefully, some of you know how they work and some maybe need a refresher. So Burbank Housing has been around for 41 years now. We are now serving almost 10,000 residents across a portfolio of 3,200 units. So the federal low-income tax credit program has been around since 1986. It offers tax incentives for private investment in affordable housing. Most of the investors in affordable housing are banks, pension funds, insurance companies. It used to be that individuals were able to invest in tax credits, but it's really become more of these large entities. And the tax credit program is quite a bipartisan program because it does have the interest of the business sector that sees this as an advantageous way to both for banks that need to do a decent amount for the community, but also get good returns on their investments. So the two types of tax credits, we all call them 4% and 9% tax credits. And until this last year, the 4% tax credit wasn't really a 4% tax credit. It was like a 3.1% tax credit. But as of December of 2020, now we have a 9% fixed rate and a 4% fixed rate tax credit. It's going to make things a lot easier. There's no guessing from year to year as to what the rate's going to be. The 4% tax credits cover about 30% of the development costs. These are just rules of thumb. They are in quite a bit greater supply than the 9% tax credits, but they've also very recently become incredibly, if you go back about 2 years, year and a half, 4% tax credits combined with tax exempt bonds were almost a given for an affordable housing project if it met the general ramifications of what is required for affordable housing. They would get the tax credits along with the bonds. Then when the bonds became oversubscribed at the state level, that meant that the 4% tax credits themselves were also going to be much more competitive. And because of the high demand, I mean, we're way under housed in the state of California for purposes of affordable housing as well as middle market housing. In the last round of 4% tax credits, there were at least 3 projects for every one that got funded. And many developers, affordable and market rate developers, put an incredible amount of time and money into making these projects feasible to the point where they can go in for credits. And yet they're waiting for this to open back up and hopefully make the 4% tax credit non-competitive and allow projects to move forward. The 9% tax credits have always been competitive. They have a higher level of scoring. They're very of the development costs, and they generally don't require as many other sources to make them work. Whereas the 4%, you've got to put together a whole package of different sources, including local funding and state funding. And that's the next slide. So if you looked at a typical project, this would be probably more likely a 4% project, where the federal tax credits would come in for a little less than half, maybe 40% of the project. The state programs, MHP, multifamily housing program, No Place Like Home, which is serving formerly homeless. All these different state programs are part of the state housing funds that, especially for nonprofits, we look to those sources to help make projects pencil. They also have some disadvantages in that it triggers prevailing wage, which increases costs, and they're also very competitive. So the state tax credits have been another source recently for equity for projects. Of the entire 100% of funding, only 9% comes from private banks, rough private debt. And then various other programs. Local funds are a very important piece. It's 4% of the total, but sometimes that local source is the make or break. It's the gap that is still there when the project is trying to move forward. And when we talk about local funds, we're talking about not just the municipalities, but the county and other programs that may come from local sources. Federal Home Loan Bank is the AHP program, which is also available. So why do tax credits matter? They help fund a vast majority of affordable housing projects in California. Used to be, when tax credits started back in '86, there were a lot of HUD programs. HUD had a lot of money that funded projects. And even more recently, you had redevelopment in the state that was funding a lot of variety of projects, including projects in Sebastopol. Now it's tax credits, and very hard to, you can swap out tax credits for something else if there's a resource that can help fund the difference. I think there's an effort on the part of the state right now to look at ways to move past tax credits and keep projects moving forward. But it's hard. So tax credit is different than a tax deduction. It's a dollar for dollar reduction of taxes owed. So low income tax credits, what we're talking about, but there's others, including new markets tax credits. I've got a lot of experience with that, with its community development based. So if you're looking at trying to fund charter school, those are tapping into things like new markets tax credits, and that just got an extension of 5 years, very exciting. And then other smaller tax credits that help projects move forward. So Section 42, the federal tax credit, specifically has to be for rental housing. It's not transient, it's permanent housing. And it's for residents at 60% AMI, average median income or less. On this slide, it talks about 80% for income averaging, which means that you can have some percentage of the residents meeting, as long as it averages out to be 60% or less. But the IRS has come out with new guidance that is making that more difficult, and it may in fact go away. So income averaging has only been around for a couple of years, and it may not be around in the future. For the 9% program, which is mostly new construction, you have to fit into one of the main categories: large families, senior housing, special needs, which includes SROs, that also includes formerly homeless, and at risk, which are projects that are maybe they were funded by HUD and now they're losing that status. So if that is the case, even if they don't meet any of these categories, they may be eligible for tax credits. Ineligible projects, owner occupied, employer provided house. If they're not individual leases, if they're group homes, they wouldn't comply. Student housing doesn't usually comply. So dormitories, mobile home parks wouldn't fit the picture either. When we look at Sonoma County, we want to know what the average incomes are for residents. I mean, it's going to vary from town to town what the people in that town earn, but we use the TCAC category, which goes by the entire county. So doesn't matter where you live in the county, this is the criteria. 30% of median income, which is extremely low income. That for a family of 4 would be $35,000 a year. 50% of median would be $48,000, and 60% of median would be $60,000. Those are brand new numbers that just came out like last week for 2020. So you set rents on 30 persons per bedroom. I can tell you in many developments, not necessarily well-run affordable housing projects, but in projects that may not be so well-run or well-monitored, you might find 2 or 3 people per bedroom. I've been involved in a project in the city of San Francisco in which they had hammocks in the living room, dangling from one side to the other, where, I mean, they were just finding any space in the apartment for people. The other criteria is that it has to be a decent amount below market. So even if market rents in that particular neighborhood aren't that high, this still has to be, in order for investors to feel comfortable with the project, they want to make sure that it's not going to have vacancies. And the only way to make sure that it's not going to be vacant is that it's going to be well below the market. So 20% or more is really a better number to work from. Multiple funding sources, they all have to meet the affordability, will be the one that's adhered to if they overlap. And now we're going to take a closer look at Stoddard. These are all pictures of Stoddard at various angles. It's 50 units at or below 30 to 60% of average median income. Burbank signed an agreement with the Gasser Foundation for the land in 2017, and the project was approved and funded within 2.5 years using the 9% tax credits, which is relatively fast to get everything entitled and approved and awarded funds. Also, you see some charging points. Even affordable housing projects they're solar friendly and EV friendly, and we're trying to incentivize in a number. I think there's a number of rebate programs to support low-income people using hybrids and electric cars. This was a particularly interesting part of Stoddard, is that it's an expensive building. It needed a lot of funding, and 9% allocation of tax credits. Gasser Foundation provided funding, as well as the land, the city and the county of Napa, other philanthropic groups, and a construction lender, a permanent lender, and an investor in Wells Fargo. And project was completed 2.5 years from 2017, and completed in 2019. So now I'm going to switch back. See, please wait, not that long. Now, why isn't it going? Okay. Here we go. So some of you may recognize this is 3575 Mendocino, the former Journey's End Mobile Home Park in Santa Rosa. This site is 13.3 acres that is not yet underway, but will be probably later this year. It's received all of its entitlements. What you're looking at is the fully built out site, of which only a portion of the site will be developed by Burbank, although Burbank did all of the entitlements for the entire site. The rest of it will be developed by a yet to be determined market rate developer. But the street network, the infrastructure, all of the planning, the removal of the mobile homes, and working payments out with the residents who were displaced by Burbank Housing. This site, this portion is the 162 unit senior housing component that is a joint development of Burbank Housing and the related companies, which is a for-profit national affordable housing developer that is teaming up with us to make this happen. What the first phase, which received disaster tax credits in late 2020, will be funding the first 90 units, I want to say, 94 units, excuse me, of the development. But it'll be 2 or 3 phases before it gets completely built. Keratos Homes is one that I'm going to talk about a little bit more tonight, because it is a collaborative effort between Burbank and Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities of Santa Rosa owns the land and is providing a ground lease for the development of 2 phases of housing for Keratos Homes, which is using the No Place Like Home funding source to provide housing for formerly homeless for just under 50% of each of the buildings units. The rest will be family housing. And strong, and the Catholic Charities is developing their new headquarters and a building called Keratos Center on the other side of this property. This is very close to downtown, close to smart transit, so it allowed the kind of density that you're seeing here that wouldn't necessarily be true if it were in less of a transit-friendly location. But Keratos will be the transitional housing component. It will also have a health center and a navigation center for the area. Heritage House in Valle Verde is another project that is using No Place Like Home. That is in Napa, and that's a combination of Heritage House being a former and closed down assisted living facility that's been vacant for about 10 years or longer. And Valle Verde is a new construction 24 unit building that will be built next to it. Combined, the two properties will be 90 units. And Petaluma River Place is another project that has applied for No Place Like Home funds, not for 50% of the units, but for about 30% of the units. We're also looking at a program for farm workers. The location in Petaluma is very close to 116 that would lead into the Sonoma Valley, as well as access to the dairy farms and other components of Petaluma. So this sits on the Petaluma River at the south end of town. Crossroads Apartments, I wanted to show this. This is this opened in 2018 in Santa Rosa. But this is probably more compatible with sites, except for, say, a downtown site of Sebastopol. This one is probably more sympathetic with the design and the feel of Sebastopol. So I wanted to show both the layout. It's a beautiful site in terms of the landscaping, a lot of drought tolerant landscaping on the properties. They're just 2-story buildings, a lot of play areas for the kids, but still close to transportation and schools. So that's 79 units. And we can go over that. We have a list of some of the properties. So Burbank's process for assessing and evaluating sites and looking at pre-development for projects. First of all, obviously, is identifying a site, but sometimes it's a site that's brought to us through our partnerships or relationships. And quite often, hint, hint, municipalities. That sometimes municipalities feel it necessary to do a RFQ or RFP for projects, but sometimes they're not constrained by funding sources. That happened in one of the other communities where they basically pointed to some properties that were going on the market for they were somewhat dilapidated, but the demand that they would bring to market rate developers to convert them into high rent second homes, or there was a definite interest to move quickly to secure that site, those properties, and work with us on putting them together for a new development. And that project is moving forward. So typically the sites, the land sites are vacant, but not always. Sometimes they have to be demolished, and sometimes it's an assemblage where it's 2 or 3 parcels that are combined. I think in one of yours, I'm familiar with the Woodmark project, and I think that looks like that was an assemblage of a couple of different parcels. If I saw the addresses on here. So sometimes just going after a listing isn't the best way to creatively acquire property. Sometimes it's quietly putting together a few different parcels to do a development. We're also seeing a number of developers come to us or come to the cities looking for an inclusionary partner for their projects in order to meet the inclusionary requirements. Some of the communities in Sonoma County require it to be on-site. Others allow an in lieu fee instead. And frankly, we kind of like the in lieu fees because it allows us to do a site the way we like it, accessing the funds directly rather than working with them on. I like to do an inclusionary project on a developer site if the site is large enough to allow for a completely separate parcel. Otherwise, they're asked to provide affordable housing scattered throughout their project or on a component of the project, and it's challenging to make the architecture work for both sides. It just doesn't the nature of tax credits makes it more complicated. So sometimes that's, so again, assess the feasibility and funding, obviously zoning, but also what the Plan Commission can support in terms of density, available transit, and making sure that the property can be bought right and make financial sense. And once we see that, and we take a look at what's the appropriate population. Is this a family-friendly location? Is this near schools? Does it make sense there, or is it more close to hospitals and banks and things that seniors may like? So, or is it near services that we're seeing more and more projects that are serving at least a component of the buildings for formerly homeless. So so those are things to look at, and then also making sure that we make sure that this site makes sense. There are often constraints that aren't evident from the get-go, whether it's through soil reports, geotech, wetlands, other things that may come up in the process of evaluating a site. If it's reasonable and if you're ready to move into a contract, we certainly want 30 to 90 days, depending on the nature of the site, of real due diligence. And then also the nature of affordable housing is that we prefer to have a patient seller who will allow us to go through that process of accessing tax credits. That doesn't mean that we ask them to allow us to do this for free, but maybe there's some modest extension fees that can be used as we get closer and closer to certainty. So moving into the faith-based properties and affordable housing, wanted to talk first about SB 899 in particular, because that was a exciting opportunity last year when that was being proposed, which it specifically was calling out church-owned or faith-based properties, as well as at one point it was nonprofit hospitals and higher institutions. If they had surplus land, those could be eligible for meeting the SB 899 need, which is using a streamlined process. You would avoid CEQA, but I think there's some trade-offs with with streamlining, and I understand that with municipalities that want to make sure that a good quality project gets built there. And I think more communities are looking at having more objective design criteria. So there's minimal risk of projects moving forward without meeting some of those standards. We completed a SB 35 process recently that was before there was objective criteria, but we also worked closely with the city, and I don't think there were any significant issues there. I also understand that some of the programs do kind of push the envelope a little bit on density where maybe it shouldn't be. So I think that the goal here is to have nonprofits in particular and cities work on the affordable housing set aside. Most of our projects are 100% affordable, and we're not going to get support for getting tax credits if it's a poorly planned project, if it doesn't meet sustainability needs, energy efficiency, high standards of construction, and what we look at is the density bonus is a benefit that doesn't necessarily mean that you double or triple the size of the project. It's 130% of what was already zoned, but can make a huge difference, especially when doing affordable housing. We're competing with market rate developers who are willing to pay more than we can afford. So there are issues there. But there's also a roadblock that stopped SB 899 from happening and is threatening any number of legislative activities going on right now, which is the unions, and they are pushing for a skilled and trained workforce is the language, which goes well above and beyond prevailing wage, which is something that we're kind of expecting these days. The nonprofits aren't surprised to have prevailing wage in projects because it's tied to most of the funding that we get from the state. But to contractors does limit the pool of potential available contractors, and those that are not necessarily local may be charging higher rates. So in many ways, it's going to negatively impact affordable housing. Washington State passed in 2019 similar legislation, did not have the same issues, and they've produced 2 collaborative projects through one organization. There may be others. I just was able to find out about these. One that included permanent supportive housing, and another that had an attached service center and food bank. And that was a collaborative effort between a church and an affordable housing developer. So I think there's a lot of ways to find a synergy between the needs and interests of churches and synagogues and those of affordable housing developers. We'll jump into that a little bit more. So development is often an alien process to churches and synagogues. It can seem risky, and even partnerships are kind of awkward and puzzling for them, especially if they don't know who they're working with. Just being a nonprofit isn't enough. They have to get a comfort level. Tax credits are confusing for the best of us, and they're daunting for a church to understand if they're going to be turning over land or partnering with a tax credit investor. There are ways to do this where, like with Catholic Charities at Keratos, a ground lease might be something in which you maintain a certain amount of control, but it still is giving over land. I also think this is, the ship is coming in with paying market rate values for land, and being able to get a cash flow return on top of that if you're a partner. That just gets in the way of being able to produce good affordable housing. And the timeline is long and complicated and can include maybe a nasty process with neighbors if the density isn't what they want, and sometimes they don't want any density. So it's never fun to work in a community with competing interests that have a voice. But in the end, they still may see that the rewards outweigh the risks. We've seen more situations where the ecumenical organization just flat out sells the land and doesn't stay involved, but others do see benefits. And if there are compatible new uses that may be helped, the financing may be helping with childcare or healthcare, things like that. So if we were to do something with a faith-based organization, first things first is get to know them. So your goals are aligned, and discuss both the monetary and non-monetary benefits. So some of that might be intergenerational living and things that the church finds of value. The food bank, for one, that was helpful. I mean, there can be any number of things that aren't directly related to a dollar figure that can work. And important early on is to create a set of responsibilities. Who's doing what? Who's in the lead? Who is simply in a support role but has no direct say? And where do you need both to sign off on things to move forward? Get clear where we're looking at on the site, and what the uses might be, and who's providing the finances at what stage. When you get some of that general idea in, as quickly as possible, come to meet with city planning, or a city manager or both. Probably not yet city council or anything like that, but just to get a handle on, are we all working in the right direction? And then very quickly, get an MOU together. It's extremely helpful, even if it's non-binding, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. In Sebastopol, these two properties were identified in the housing element in the inventory. The 500 Robinson site was almost redeveloped by a church affiliate, a senior rental, before redevelopment, as we all knew it, was shut down and the funding was lost. My understanding is I've not approached anybody, but they seem to be using the property to its full extent, even though it's a couple of acres. But I'd be very interested in following up, and maybe there's an opportunity there. Same thing with 7983 Covert, which is St. Sebastian, is that right, Carrie? Right. And that also is identified in the inventory. It's a great location and has 6.5 acres of land. And Burbank built Sequoia Village on an adjacent site back in 2009. Still trying to find out if that was formerly church-owned land or just happened to be right next to that church. And then there's many other religious properties in and around as value both to them and to the community. So I would look forward to walking the streets and the driving the back roads and finding something that makes sense to redevelop. And open for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Rich. Kathy, I see you're raising your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you are currently working with any of the churches or property owners in Sebastopol right now, or are there no opportunities at the current time?
No, I'm not.
Anyone else have any questions for Rich?
Come on, Luke. I was just in a meeting with Luke yesterday. So
I did have one really specific question, which was about the 9% tax credit and eligibility for SROs being included in that. Is there any sort of particular criteria they have to meet in terms of special needs service delivery in order to get that, or is just being kind of a micro unit type development eligibility enough?
It's a good question. I mean, SROs are, when I think of an SRO and developing an SRO, it almost inherently is supportive housing. But I was involved in building 170 unit SROs in Chicago back in sometime in the last 20 years. And at that time, the SROs weren't necessarily only for homeless people. They were designed to be for service workers. The last one we did was for hotel workers. And they didn't necessarily need the level of supportive services that these days, when we look at SROs, we think about permanent supportive housing, housing first, and some of those programs. So it kind of depends on where you are and what the models are. I kind of mentioned I did some consulting work with TNDC before joining Burbank, and they have all kinds of different versions of their neighborhood SROs. Some of them have a deep permanent supportive housing model, and others are very similar in that they're just serving. In one of the properties that I was working with them on acquiring, surprising number of the residents in that building were actually Twitter employees, and young millennials that were just needing a space for a laptop and a bed and working their 14-hour day weeks, 14-hour days. So I don't. I know that if you're looking to qualify under meeting homelessness, then there's absolutely a supportive housing component to that. So that's critical. And services are essential for all projects, and there are different levels of criteria for SROs. But I don't think it's to the level of PSH, but it should be a high level of services.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Anyone else have a question? Go ahead, Everett.
Hi, Rich, thank you very much for taking the time to give us this information. It gives us a lot to think about and perhaps some incentives. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the zoning laws and so forth in Sebastopol. I'm just wondering, are there changes or certain considerations that should be made to maybe be more proactive to allow these types of projects? Or is that something that maybe as projects come along has to be looked at one by one?
I'm not sure what your question is should you be more proactive, or?
Yeah, I mean, are there zoning regulations that would prevent some of the projects, or that perhaps changes that could help it? Or how do you see our zoning regulations as far as to be able to either help with these projects or be more complex for them?
It's interesting that, I pointed to Crossroads. I said that there's a trade-off. Each community seems to be pushing hard for density, transit friendly. We were right on the smart train line, which you're not, but so those criteria are driving some of the density needs and requirements. But high density development is also very expensive to build. So just the Keratos project, or which it was one of the first podium projects in Sonoma County, it can be very expensive to build high density. So we're very comfortable building 3-story walk-up complexes. Maybe it's an elevator, but it isn't necessarily garage parking versus being able to use the additional land. But we butt up against some of the criteria that scores projects for tax credits, and they want that density. So it's a constant struggle. I think being open to higher density in the right locations is something that you could take a look at, and I'm sure hotels and market rate developers are looking for kind of the same thing. But Sebastopol is still a rural community, or it's at least considered a rural community from the standpoint of tax credits, which we like. One of the reasons why I would love to do a project in Sebastopol is because of the rural designation. Like Sonoma has it, Sebastopol has it, Cloverdale, but not many others. And that has its own set aside for tax credits that is beneficial. So Sonoma as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
And go ahead, Kathy.
SROs, that's single resident.
Single room occupancy.
Single room. I see something that is often used for students in areas like Carvallis, where I visit frequently, where you've got maybe 5 master bedrooms that adjoin to a common kitchen and living room and laundry facilities. And I wonder whether that works well for the people who need a single room unit, or whether that's more efficient or more affordable. It seems like it could be more affordable because so many of the spaces are shared.
Sure. So I think before COVID, you were seeing a whole flurry of, particularly in major cities, the WeWork and the WeLive models. Common, I think, is another company that was doing that, where they were developing excuse me, apartments that had, you know, different residents who didn't necessarily know each other sharing an apartment. So it is very similar to suite style living in dormitories. It may come back, you know, now that COVID is hopefully going away. But who knows? I mean, things are changing. But it's definitely something that people have been innovating and thinking about. Just like co-housing was a novel idea, you know, 30 years ago or 40 years ago.
I'm thinking it seems like an appropriate model for seniors
Mm-hmm.
because of the shared commonality they would have
Sure.
with having roommates and not living alone.
Yeah, and not being isolated. Absolutely.
So,
One of the things that we're very concerned about when we design buildings for formerly homeless is that they don't, you know, have this new isolation where they're living in these single units and shut off from the rest of the community. So it's important to have common spaces, indoor spaces and outdoor spaces for people to gather. It may or may not make sense for them to occupy units with strangers. I mean, that can get awkward, but certainly with friends. And there are roommate style apartments that are in the affordable housing world as well. So two people can qualify and share the costs.
I have a question just to sort of follow up on Kathy's question. So if, you know, that kind of model, sort of like a suite sort of thing, does that fit into any tax credit kind of like program, or could that qualify for tax credit? It's not exactly a large family or a senior, or I'm just wondering how that.
Yeah, I mean, if it were a 2-bedroom and the bedrooms were on the opposite side of the space and the kitchen and the living was in the middle, you would just be qualifying 2 incomes for the unit. So it could potentially work well.
I noticed that a lot of, excuse me for stepping in, I noticed that when we walk through homes under construction, we notice that there frequently are a lot of master bedrooms in the homes. It may be a 3-bedroom.
Right, dual masters.
Like there's
Yeah,
an office off the garage with a bathroom,
right.
which could be a living unit with access to the kitchen. So it seems like many homes today, although they're large, are intended for more than just one family unit.
Right, and then of course there's the ADU movement that is doing the same thing.
You know, Kathy, I'm actually working on a project right now that's kind of like that. It's a veterans housing project, and each house has 6 bedrooms. Each bedroom has its own bathroom and kind of like a wet bar area, you know, be a sink and an under-counter refrigerator. But then there's a larger like living room, dining room, common kitchen area. But it'll be intended for 6, you know, unrelated people to kind of share housing. And then each property will also have a 2-bedroom ADU, kind of similarly set up. So there'll be 8 people living on each property, kind of sharing kind of common spaces, but also having their own space to kind of retreat to as well.
Yeah.
So, but that's true. That's a group home.
Kind of, yeah.
It really is a group home, and that would not be a tax credit model, but there are other funding sources that can support that.
Yeah. I had a question, just I wonder if you could speak a little bit more, because I know we've had conversations in the Planning Commission about in lieu fees. And you kind of alluded to the fact that you like in lieu fees because you guys get the fees. But we often, you know, struggle with.
Yeah, we don't get. Yeah, it's gap financing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you get, yeah, when other people pay in lieu fees, that goes to the city's affordable housing fund.
Right.
You guys can use that.
Right.
They can give that money to you. But so I'm just, you know, because we discuss a lot, well, we want to make developers integrate and do the housing on site, and that's kind of this push and pull as to how best to accommodate more affordable housing. I just wanted, maybe you could speak to a little bit more to that issue.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question, and I think sometimes there's some rigid thinking around that, you know, trying to push a model onto market market rate developers that isn't their comfort zone, and they're not, they're not comfortable, they're not good managers necessarily, in the same way that it's I've seen more projects fall apart because of the push for below market rents in their market rate projects that creates a stigma. There's challenges with people being called out in a community. So I think there's definitely some reasons to rethink whether making them integrated in development is the best angle. Go ahead.
I was going to say, you might not know this off the top of your head. I'm just wondering what kind of, do you know what kind of inclusionary fees other communities impose on developers who don't build the inclusionary?
Well, do you have a policy?
We do. I know we have.
I'm happy to talk about it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because I have a breakdown. I think you're in there. That I think Santa Rosa put it together for all the communities in Sonoma, and they're all across the board.
Yeah. I can't remember specifically what our policy is. I know we kind of changed our inclusionary. It's a little more flexible. You have sort of different options depending on the level of affordability as to the percent that you provide. I don't remember where we ended up with the fee. If we allow, I think we just allow a fee for percent. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, so our current inclusionary housing, it used to be 20%. And I forget what level that was, if that was moderate. We changed it to be 15% for moderate, or you can do 10% at low, or you can do 5% at very low. So that gives the developer an option of, fewer units with a higher affordability level, or more units at a more moderate, to kind of help them pencil it out. And then we do require, and we also increased it to, I believe it's 5 or more units. It used to be 3 units or more. So we exempted smaller projects as well as projects that are 840 square feet or less. So we exempt a bunch of stuff.
Right.
We do require, if there's a fraction of a unit, so say you owe 1.5 units, you can choose to pay the 0.5 as the fee, or you can build 2 units. I know, like the Davis townhomes, they had 1.8 and they actually chose to build 2, which is great for us because we like to have the units on the ground, obviously. From the city's perspective, that the money you get it is enough for gap financing or those types of things, but it's never enough to actually go build a unit. Our current fee is about $22 a square foot, is sort of the equation of it. So you work out the average size of a unit, and then if it's half a unit, then half of that times the square footage, half the square footage times the fee. For the development impact fee update that's going to council next week, that basically is going to remain the same. We've done the calculations for that, and it's basically staying about the same.
I mean, I think if there are no projects to fund in terms of taking in lieu fees because there's no sites, or there's nothing that you can develop, then that's probably the next best thing. But to scatter the affordable units throughout a lot of small projects and not being able to create a place for residents, I mean, I just think that there's a reason there's affordable housing developers and developments that have a wide range of income levels of those residents and able to access all these different resources, that the market rate developer is just it creates an impact on the marketplace in terms of land values, that they have to sometimes projects don't move forward at all because of the inclusionary requirement. I've heard of, just in Petaluma alone, more projects than I can think of that have had the developer walk away because of the on-site inclusionary requirement. when we would have gladly taken that money and put it towards one of our projects or someone else's project in the community.
You also mentioned kind of, sometimes you can partner with a market rate developer on a
Correct.
project and you'll do the affordable piece of it.
Right.
When you do that kind of thing, do you just kind of completely separate, like, do you create two lots? So you do your project on your lot, they do the project on their lot. It's not like one project and you kind of blend it somehow.
I mean, it can be blended. I mean, there can be shared amenities, a shared park, shared community room. It's possible.
But the buildings would always be separate. You wouldn't have like you wouldn't like take.
Yeah, well, the reason is, the tax credit model has a whole partnership just for itself. So there's the Bank of Americas and the Wells Fargos that are investing in, a building that is in that way separate. And that seems to make more sense. It's kind of a legal mess when you try to, you can't intersperse affordable in a market rate and get the tax credit benefits the same way. Or you can, but the developer won't be able to sell, and they won't be able to, they'll be constrained in ways that they won't find acceptable.
Yeah. Any other questions for Rich, any of the commissioners? I can open this up for public hearing. If any member of the public has any comments, we can't have, it's not really a dialogue, but if you have a comment or question, we can respond to your question after all public comments have been taken.
See if anyone's out there.
Anyone there?
And Paul, I do have one that was through the chat window that was sent to me, so I'll just read it. With the Biden administration's declared focus on mitigating homelessness, lack of affordable housing, and dramatic carbon reduction programs, can we expect serious incremental funding in these areas? Is there potential interest in an entire green low-income housing subdivisions?
Those are a lot of questions. I think there is a lot of momentum in Washington that's going to hopefully help the tax credit model. It's going to help bonds. The infrastructure bill has a number of components in it that include items that can help affordable housing. The COVID Relief Act had money going towards it, but some of it hasn't been flowing yet. So we'll see as far as what's going on in Washington. And then the green aspect, the tax credit program and all of the funding sources, they're all pushing for sustainability, and you score points for solar, you score points for we don't have an issue with drainage, green roofs and things like that. We need some rain here. But yeah, so all those things that everyone, I'm sure, in Sebastopol cares about in terms of environmental sustainability are incorporated in many ways into the design of affordable housing.
Do you see anyone else out there, Carrie, making a motion to?
I do not, thank you. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Thanks, Paul.
Great. We'll close public comment. And any commissioners have any other final thoughts or questions?
Linda here. I'd like to ask Rich a question.
Sure, go ahead.
With the talk of commercial properties maybe not going to get tenants and maybe repurposing to housing, do you have any experience or anything you could share with us? We certainly have a few buildings, but it's not like we're a big enough town. But so I'll leave that question.
So adaptive reuse is a category that has some criteria for scoring that helps projects move forward. So an office building that may not be so big and wide, but is small enough that there's windows relatively close to each other, so bedrooms can have windows, and that those would be exciting to work on. Absolutely. Do you have any in mind? It actually,
Well,
it's been very frustrating recently in that the state is kind of frowning on supporting acquisition rehab these days. We've had a tough time getting projects to move forward when it's just a residential rehab. Like the one I was talking about earlier, where the town came to us and said, save this building from the market so we can maintain affordability for residents. Converting residential properties takes 20% of the time and money that building from scratch does, particularly time, but also money. Adaptive reuse is definitely a way around that, although it gets expensive fast when you're dealing with codes and compatible. I mean, I've been involved in historic rehabs a lot in the past, and those are really fun to work with, where almost never were those old buildings residential, and they're getting converted to lofts and exciting spaces.
Rich, I want to thank you for your very, very wonderful presentation. I've been doing this a long time, 20 years between planning and city council and back to planning, but your presentation was very, very informative. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hopefully we can keep working, towards our goals. I've always been a real big supporter of inclusionary, built on site, so you have economic diversity, but I've come to change my mind on that, and because it's a challenge, and we've certainly have tried to go with the flair of building it on site.
Just make the site big enough that there's space for a separate piece. That's the best thing.
And I've always been concerned that our in lieu fees compared to like Marin, which years ago was like $90,000, and here it's and I know I'm mixing square footage with per unit, and that's not fair. But it just seems to me that that we might not be charging enough.
Well, I tend to hear, just from my recent experience in Sebastopol, that there's a lot more willingness to pay fees than to deal with having to provide on site, and they'll pay up to do so. So you might be surprised.
Very good.
Uh-oh,
No, I will say there are, on that front, there are nexus requirements, as you all heard with development impact fees. There needs to be a connection between what you're charging and, what is
Sure.
that gap in affordability between
Right.
that. So we could, I'd love to say, yeah, you can buy it, but you're basically going to buy our unit.
Right. Speaking of which, I just want to make one quick pitch, because I won't name the town, but there is a town that's actually considering dropping impact fees on affordable housing developments. And that would be a godsend to helping move our projects forward. We'll pay the permit fees, we'll pay the sewer and water fees. I mean, but the impact fees, that's a killer for affordable housing. And we then come back to you and the county and other places to help fund that, because it's $1 million or $2 million going into a project that the the project either doesn't get built and then you don't collect the impact fee, or, so it's a trade-off. And I
And
look,
Rich, just a question on that, because I know our city council has heard requests for waiving or reducing fees
Yeah.
on occasion for certain projects, and they've certainly shown an openness to that. And that's, our planning commission is also our park commission, so of course they're always looking at this very small park budget,
right.
things like that too. But to me, that's actually a way where, yeah, we may not have excess land. We may have some, as we talked about in our last, if there's parking lots or things like that, although I know that's been discussed fairly recently in the past, and the concerns for the business community and the parking there's certainly stresses around that. But, the city certainly does have the ability to, we do have both inclusionary fees as well as a commercial linkage fee. So larger commercial projects pay a fee for affordable housing too. So we do have some money for that type of gap funding. But we also obviously have the ability to do, just as you said, on a case-by-case basis, at least waive or reduce fees for projects. And I believe the city's certainly done that in the past, in addition to some of the development we've been doing.
Well, just as a thought, when a community waives its impact fees for affordable housing, it triggers prevailing wage. Now, that might not, we might be paying prevailing wage anyway, but if that were, in certain circumstances, we don't want to trigger it for just that purpose, because we end up paying every bit as much for getting that waiver. If it were taken off altogether, it would not be a waiver and it would not trigger that kind of impact. Just FYI.
Go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, Luke.
Yeah, I just wanted to close
Luke
it
is
out
muted.
with a handful of thank yous. Just thank you so much to Rich for this presentation. I think it's been really informative, along with all the presentations that we've had in this series so far. And I think we'd be remiss to also not thank former Commissioner Kate Haug for pulling this together. And
I was wondering where she was.
yeah, there was, I won't go into it, but
Okay.
anyway. And I also just want to thank Carrie and city staff also for communicating these presentations and being sure to get them on the website. So it was really glad to see that as well.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much, Rich. It was very informative and educational, and I think this whole series is going to be, yeah, it's really helping, I think, us understand kind of the issues that you face as affordable housing developers, and try to think about how we can partner with you and have a better relationship.
Great. Look forward to future endeavors.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.